So let's move into the video game arena. When did you get started with Sega and how?
Well, that's a great story. I had moved back to the Bay Area. I'm born and raised here, and when I moved to San Diego to go to school and started a company down there and had my first child, and 6 months later decided to move back to the Bay Area because I had reconnected with a high school friend who called because she had heard some of my music on the radio and said, hey, my husband's in the music business. You guys ought to connect sometime. And I'm thinking to myself, you know, he plays in a bar band or something, right? And turns out to be Walter Afanasiev, who at the time had just signed this little 18-year-old girl from New York City named Mariah Carey, right?
My
And
goodness.
so I come up and meet him, and his walls are covered with platinum, and he's working with Boys to Men, and he's writing the theme to Aladdin, and he's doing all this huge stuff. And I thought, okay, it's time to get back up here to the Bay Area and get, you know, retrenched in the culture here. So anyway, I'm back here. I'm working a few little things with him, just getting to know each other and writing some commercial stuff. And I get a call out of the blue, and the person on the other end of the phone says, "Hi, I'm so-and-so from the so-and-so recruiting company. Have you ever thought about writing music for video games?" And my answer was, "Do video games have music?" I mean, that's how much I knew about it. And this is 1991.
Yeah.
And I had never seen a console game, much less ever played one.
Right.
So, you know, being the age I am, I grew up going to the arcades and playing arcade video games, I guess they were called that, and pinball and things like that. But what was coming out of them I didn't consider to be music. And that's not being high and mighty. It's just it was bleeps and blips.
Absolutely. Someone at Industrial Light and Magic wouldn't look at Space Invaders and consider the graphics anything serious when it was compared to something they would do. But I mean, the same goes for John Williams listening to the two-note score.
That's exactly right. So I excused myself and said, "Hey, I'm sorry if I sound completely ignorant, but maybe you could tell me a little bit more about what you're looking for." And they said, "Well, I'll tell you what, the easiest thing to do is come down here and, you know, come to this company called Sega that's getting, you know, Sega of America. It's getting launched down on the peninsula in Silicon Valley, and we'll have you sign a non-disclosure, and we'll be able to tell you a little bit more." So I did that. Over the course of the next 2 months, I continued to go back to interview with them. I thought, this is interesting enough to take it to the next level. And once I saw that they were moving to the CD-ROM, I thought, okay, this is getting really interesting now. And also, I have to say, what I noticed about the people I was meeting was that at one far extreme, you had rocket scientists, literally. They were mathematicians, some of which had helped put the shuttle in space. And they literally were NASA-level engineers. And at the other end of the spectrum were toy people. The president of Sega of America at the time was Tom Kalinske, who was best known for bringing Mattel back out of the ashes with the reintroduction of Barbie and Matchbox and, you know, these other, or Hot Wheels or whatever it was that he had, you know, had been his claim to fame. He was the president of the company. But in between, there were no entertainment people. There weren't a lot of people from the film business. There weren't people from the music industry at all. And up to that point, a lot of the music was created by really programmers with some musical ability.
Right.
And I'm using a lot of generalities here. Of course, there were people that were highly trained musicians, but also good programmers. You had to have that programming element in your toolbox to really be good at it and to make these boxes make sound. And it was funny, the first time I was introduced to the 16-bit Genesis, it had a cartridge in the top with a bunch of MIDI cables coming out of it. It had basically been hot rodded so that you could control from a relatively advanced interface. You could control the 6-voice, you know, 6-operator FM synthesizer chip on the Genesis cartridge. And since I had had a lot of experience at that point programming the DX7, the Yamaha DX7,
Yeah, all those algorithms.
exactly, I had a little bit of an advantage in getting up to speed with this Genesis technology. But I have to say 90% of what I did was full bandwidth Redbook audio. And then I would have help from the Japanese programmers in Japan in converting my stuff to the Genesis. So you had asked about some of the stuff in Ecco for the Genesis, and a lot of the sounds or the synthesis on the Genesis was an attempt by the Japanese and the people at NovaTrade to take my full score from the CD-ROM version and make it come close to what we had done.
Now, I believe you wrote the theme for Sonic CD, one of the first vocal tracks in a console game, Sonic Boom. Is that right?
It was huge. Yeah, it was huge. Yeah, I did.
Okay, so that was a case where with all this work you were doing with live music and studio technology, and Japan would convert your tracks to the Genesis FM synthesizer. Were you pleased with the result?
I was actually blown away, especially with the Japanese programmers. I was blown away with what they were able to do with that chip. I mean, they would get delay. They would, simulate reverb. And everything was, you were always note stealing. You were always, this operator is giving you the piano in this section of that song, and then all of a sudden it becomes the hi-hat, in the next section. It was just amazing what they could do, way more than what I could do with it. And so just from a production schedule and budget standpoint, it made sense for me to concentrate on the, because I'm a very hands-on programmer, engineer, producer. I do it all, basically. So it was much more advantageous for me to make these big, lush scores for the, the Sega CD and the Sega Saturn versions of this stuff, because it helped to sell those systems and sell those games, because we were doing stuff soundtrack-wise that no one was doing. We employed Q Sound early in the process, and that's how I was able to get, in the CD-ROM versions of Spider-Man and Batman Returns and Ecco, especially Ecco, the sound would move around the player, even though they were listening on two small little stereo speakers in their television. I was able to move whale sounds around the player's head and under them, and so we were doing things that nobody was doing at the time. And this wasn't Dolby, Pro Logic or anything. This was a whole very sophisticated system that I used in real time during the mix, and it would actually print into the signal and then play back on any stereo speakers. You didn't need the other channels. You didn't need the surround. It would actually use phasing and all this other very deep technology to move sound around the room, and I could program it in real time during the mix with a big, beautiful joystick, like from a flight simulator or something. It was really cool. So it was more advantageous for me to spend my time on the high-tech side of it and let the real pros who knew that chip inside and out do the real heavy lifting with regard, because we were on such a tight time schedule. You're trying to release these things in parallel. Right. It made sense for them to be working as I would finish tracks. I would send them the MIDI files. I would send them, my recording, so they could get as close as they could to the pads and to the, the actual arrangement, because that's a lot of my signature, or the sounds that I use and that I program and sample and all that stuff. So we tried to get them as close as we could. And I had a great team here in the United States I was working with. At this time I had left the Redwood City facility and built a gorgeous 12,000 square foot recording complex right in downtown San Francisco, and we had one of the first large format euphonics consoles, and just literally stacks of synthesizers and keyboards and stuff. And I was able to work with people like Dave Young and Jennifer Harushka and all these great programmer sound designers. And they would basically, when Ed Annunziata, the inventor of Ecco the Dolphin, he's a fantastic game producer, he came to me and said, "Spence, there's not a single human element in any of Ecco, not any level. You don't see a car, you don't see a weapon, you don't see a sunken old tire, you don't see anything. Therefore, I don't want any human sounds in the soundtrack." Right. And I'm thinking, well, that's easy for you to say,